From Texas is recognized for as much time as he might consume.
I thank my friend from Hawaii for yielding, and I thank him for the opportunity to speak on behalf of this important honor we are bestowing upon the Army by congratulating them on their 235th birthday. The first time I ever realized that I was going to be given the honor to represent the United States Army was when they had a redistricting in Texas, and I realized that my new district was going to have Fort Hood in it. And to be quite honest, it was an overpowering challenge to me to be called upon to represent over 50,000 American soldiers and all those who work with those soldiers. I was a little bit taken back, quite frankly. Mr. Edwards, as he pointed out, and who has been so helpful to me in the transition at Fort Hood. Mr. Edwards had represented them for many years and done an outstanding job, and I was going to be the new kid on the block going to Fort Hood. And so I went to my office and I said, you know, the districts are changing. We've got to go visit soldiers. We've got to be with soldiers. And I got the opportunity through the Speaker's office to go, before really I'd only spent any time at all at Fort Hood. I got the opportunity to go to Korea to visit soldiers who were stationed in Korea, many of whom were part of the soldiers' contingency that would return to Fort Hood. I grew up as a small child with what was earlier today commemorated the Korean War. To me, it was just a map of a peninsula of Korea that I watched lines move up and down. But I know from people who came back what a terrible fight that was. And I know that that's still, to this day, to this very moment we stand in history, a dangerous place on the earth. And when we got there, we were given the opportunity, my wife and I, to go up on the demilitarized zone, the DMZ, where ultimately, as a result of the ceasefire that took place in Korea, they have set up, both sides are kind of across a line looking at each other. And in fact, as recently as 4 or 5 years ago, there's been fatalities on that line. There's the opportunity for another war to break out theoretically any minute of any day, 24 hours a day, and has been since the end of the Korean War back in the 50s. So it was kind of a challenge just to go up there. And when I got there, there was all these young-faced American soldiers. My oldest son is a football coach and a baseball coach. And as I looked at these young men that I was being introduced to, they looked just like these, and women, men and women, they looked just like the kids that were at the graduation ceremony just a few months earlier that my son coached and taught. And when it came time for lunch, they gave me an opportunity to sit down at this table with this bunch of young men and women. I tell you this because it was kind of unusual. It's my first time to ever sit down with just ordinary soldiers and talk to them. And you don't really know what they're going to say. You're kind of curious. Well, the first thing I found out was there was one kid there from Killeen Ellison. He played football for my son when my son coached at Killeen Ellison. There was another kid there that played baseball for my son when he coached at Round Rock High School. So it was like I realized that these were just like those kids that had just graduated. And I went around the table, and this was all a bunch of 18 and 19-year-old soldiers. And they came from small town and big town America. They could have been your friends, your neighbors, your cousin, could have been your brother or your sister. And there they were, standing up there, potentially in harm's way on our behalf, where it's cold and windy and kind of scary. So that was my first contact, and I asked a question kind of naively. Okay, so when are you guys going to be through over here in Korea? Most of them were going to be out within the next 8 months. And I said, where do you want to go when you get out? Expecting all kinds of exotic places. No, sir, we want to go to either Afghanistan or Iraq. And my wife and I both were a little taken back by that. And so my wife asked the question, why would you want to go there? And they gave an answer that is one of the definitions, I think, of the United States Army. They said, sir, we're war fighters. That's where the war is. That's what we do for a living. We are the Army. Now, that is, you hear that from a 19-year-old kid that probably a year and a half ago had been playing on some practice field someplace in Central Texas, and you say to yourself, what magic is it that we get people like this to come out and do this job and do it willingly and with such patriotism and such fervor for doing the job they're trained for? Just recently, less than a few weeks ago, my wife and I shared this at the birthday party for the Army last night. My wife and I got a very nice honor of being part of a small delegation of members of Congress who were invited to go to the Memorial Day ceremony at Normandy Beach, where our soldiers came ashore and accomplished the impossible. And in fact, we stood on Point de Hoc, as Mr. Edwards was describing to you, and we looked at those cliffs, and we looked at the repair being done to preserve that national treasure of our heroic effort. And we got to see that beach both at high and low tide. And we got to see that the distance those soldiers had to run under heavy automatic weapon fire and artillery fire just to get to that bluff that they had to climb to get to the fight. It was, you looked at it and you said, I don't think I could have done it. That was what I thought. I don't think I could have done it. And then you realize that those kids, that's the same kids, like the same kids I talked to in Korea. They were young people who were members of the United States Army, and they had a job to do, and they did it. They told us a story about a soldier who landed there, fought his way across the beach to the bluff, fought his way up the bluff to get off of that deadly beach, only to be wounded in the hip, in the face, took off the right side of his face with a machine gun bullet. They wrapped him up on top of the bluff and said, you need to go back down on the beach for an aid station. And his comment was, I just fought my way off of that beach. And they said, no, you got to be evacuated. Going back down to be evacuated, he was shot 4 more times, the last of which took off the left side of his face. And his comment that he made when he came back to Normandy as a 90-year-old man, and they said he looked fine. He said, they did a fine job on me and I look good. I have children, I have grandchildren, I have great-grandchildren. And I did what I did for them. But I can say that I always wondered if I really ought to come to this beach because I was only here for 9 hours. True, I did get 5 Purple Hearts while I was here. But I wondered if I was worthy to come back and say I landed here because I had to be evacuated. That special something that makes up the United States Army can't be described to us in detail. But when you walk among those 10,000 crosses in that cemetery, crosses and stars of David, and you realize that those heroes laying beneath that ground are exactly like those heroes who stand on the wall in the defense of liberty in Iraq and Afghanistan today. Our soldiers today are exactly like those in the Greatest Generation. They sacrifice everything. I'm proud to represent the 31st Congressional District, which is the home of Fort Hood. Every soldier at Fort Hood has been deployed multiple times, and they never complain. They just do the job. We Americans, wherever we are, in this house, where we're so blessed to be able to serve, or around the world, should every day stop when we have the opportunity and say thank you to the United States Army for the quality of human beings they have produced to defend our nation, and for the patriotic spirit that is part of what it makes up the psyche of America. Nothing is more precious to us than the United States Army. Nothing is more honorable to me than to be given the opportunity to represent over 50,000 American soldiers. And so this day, I'm very happy to say to our United States Army, happy birthday, U.S. Army. We are proud of you. God bless you and keep you safe. I yield back.